It was a quiet Tuesday morning in the city when Jonathan Reeves, a 38-year-old self-made millionaire and CEO of a major real estate empire, walked into a small family-owned diner tucked away in a corner street, holding the tiny hand of his 6-year-old son, Ethan, who had been diagnosed with selective mutism and had barely spoken a word since his mother passed away 3 years ago, leaving Jonathan to juggle between running his empire and being a single dad, though despite all the wealth and luxury surrounding him, nothing seemed more heartbreaking than the silence of his little boy, whose bright blue eyes carried worlds of unspoken words and whose silence made Jonathan feel powerless in ways money could never fix. And as they settled into their usual booth, Jonathan ordered coffee and a simple breakfast while Ethan sat quietly fiddling with his toy car, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, and that was when she appeared. Emma Carter, a young waitress in her 20s, radiant yet simple in her demeanor, who carried an aura of warmth, her brown hair tied back loosely and her smile genuine, the kind that softened even the hardest of days, and as she approached their table to take the order, she noticed Ethan immediately, her eyes lighting up not with pity but with curiosity and care, bending down gently to his level and greeting him with a cheerful, "Hey there, buddy, what's your name?" Though Jonathan quickly intervened with a polite but slightly protective smile, explaining that his son was nonverbal and didn't like to engage with strangers, yet instead of pulling back like most people did, Emma simply smiled and placed the menu in front of Ethan, whispering softly as if it was a secret between just the two of them, "That's okay. I bet you have a voice inside you that's waiting for the right moment to come out." Words that Jonathan couldn't ignore, words that strangely echoed in his heart, and though Ethan remained silent, his little fingers stopped playing with the toy car and instead tapped gently on the menu as if acknowledging her presence, a small gesture but one that didn't go unnoticed by his father, who raised an eyebrow in surprise, because Ethan rarely responded to anyone outside of him. And over the next few days, as business meetings, boardroom negotiations, and city events drained Jonathan's energy, he kept finding himself drawn back to that diner. Not because of the food but because of the effect that one waitress seemed to have on his son, and each time, Emma would come by with that same warm smile, talking to Ethan patiently, never pushing, never demanding, sometimes drawing silly pictures on napkins, sometimes teaching him hand signs for simple words like "thank you" and "please," and sometimes just sitting silently beside him as if silence itself was a shared language. And little by little Jonathan noticed subtle changes in Ethan. His eyes seemed brighter, his body less tense, and once, as Emma drew a picture of a car on a napkin and asked, "Is this like yours?" Ethan, for the first time in months, nodded, a tiny but monumental step that made Jonathan's heart ache with gratitude, and it was in that moment he realized that Emma wasn't just serving tables, she was giving his son something priceless. Hope, connection, and a bridge back to the world of words he had long abandoned, and though Jonathan had always believed problems could be solved by money, he now understood some solutions came only from compassion. Yet what astonished him further was discovering that Emma wasn't just kind, she was knowledgeable, because when he asked her one evening how she managed to be so patient, she revealed quietly that her younger brother had once struggled with severe speech delay, and she had spent years learning small techniques to encourage him, techniques most professionals overlooked, and though her brother eventually thrived, Emma had carried that compassion with her into her everyday life, which explained the patience and understanding she showered upon Ethan. And as days turned into weeks, the bond grew stronger, until one evening, after Jonathan finished a late meeting, he decided to take Ethan for dinner at the diner, and Emma, as usual, greeted them warmly, but this time, something different happened. Ethan, clutching his toy car tightly, looked up at Emma with hesitant lips, and in the softest, almost broken voice whispered, "Car," a single word, shaky but real, a word that froze Jonathan in disbelief and brought tears to his eyes, because it wasn't just a sound, it was proof that his little boy still had a voice, proof that he wasn't lost forever, and as Jonathan tried to process it, Emma knelt down, tears shimmering in her own eyes, gently encouraging Ethan, "Yes, sweetheart, Car, you said it," and Ethan, emboldened, repeated the word again, louder this time, and Jonathan, the man who had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching, broke down right there in the middle of the diner, his hands trembling as he hugged his son tightly, whispering thank yous to Emma over and over, but Emma, ever humble, brushed it off with a smile, saying she had done nothing special, though Jonathan knew better. He knew that she had done something no therapist, no expensive program, no doctor had managed to do. She had reached his son's heart, and that night Jonathan couldn't sleep, lying awake replaying the moment over and over, realizing how deeply Emma had impacted their lives, and he found himself not just grateful but drawn to her, not as a waitress, not as an employee of the diner, but as a woman who carried a light powerful enough to heal wounds even money couldn't touch. And though his world had always been full of superficial connections, business deals, and people who admired him for his wealth, Emma was different. She didn't see his millions, she saw his son, she saw the little boy hiding behind silence, and she cared enough to help, and that was worth more than all the riches in his name. So the next day Jonathan decided to do something he had never done before. He asked Emma if she would consider spending time with Ethan outside the diner, not as a waitress, but as a mentor, a friend, someone who could continue encouraging him, offering to pay generously for her time. But Emma shook her head firmly, telling him she didn't want his money, that she would do it because she loved seeing Ethan smile, and for a man who had built a world where everything had a price tag, that simple refusal touched Jonathan more than anything, because it showed him the purity of her heart, and over time their lives became intertwined. Emma joining them for park visits, helping Ethan learn new words, sitting with him during story time, cheering him on during small victories, and slowly, almost unknowingly, becoming a part of their family. And as the months passed, Jonathan realized he wasn't just watching his son come alive again, he was watching his own heart rediscover something he thought he had buried with his late wife. Love, not born out of wealth or convenience, but out of kindness, patience, and genuine connection. And though he was cautious, fearing heartbreak again, he knew deep down that Emma had changed their story forever. And one evening, as the golden sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the park in hues of orange, Jonathan turned to Emma with Ethan sitting happily between them, softly whispering words to describe the flowers around him. And Jonathan, his voice unsteady with emotion, told her, "You didn't just give my son his voice back, you gave me mine too," a confession that made Emma's eyes widen and her heart tremble, because though she had never sought his attention, she realized in that moment how much he valued her, and that single truth changed everything, because from then on, their lives were no longer parallel stories but one, intertwined by fate, love, and the miraculous sound of a little boy's first words, proving to the world that sometimes the richest gifts in life aren't found in money, but in the hearts of those willing to care, to believe, and to love. And to anyone listening to this story, remember this: true change begins with compassion. Hope can come from the most unexpected places, and miracles often wear ordinary faces, just like a waitress with a smile and a heart big enough to teach a silent boy to speak again. So if you believe in the power of kindness, family, and love that heals even the deepest wounds, then make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Because stories like this remind us all that life's greatest treasures are found not in wealth but in the simple act of caring for one another.